Hi, everyone. Today we have Akshay Chalana on our podcast, who is a software developer at Apple. And we're going to ask him some questions about what it is like to be a software developer at Apple. So without further ado, let's jump into the first question. Before getting into the career stuff and work stuff, what is your life like during the pandemic? Like, how's it affecting your life and your work? Are you working from home all the time? And is everybody pretty much at Apple working from home these days? What's happening?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, I've been working from home myself for around 4 months now. I've lost
Wow.
track of time doing that. It was difficult to begin with, but really gotten used to it. I think productivity requires a bit of a shift in how you drive it. But once you know what you're doing, as I'm sure you figured out too, I mean, um, it sort of gets going well. So Apple as a whole, I don't really know a ton about the company-wide policies since it's largely org-based. But most of the people in my org are still working from home. There are a few people that are working on high priority things that are in the office. But certainly, I mean, there's been media coverage about this that knows a lot more than I do. And I guess I want to inject one thing for the audience before sort of to append to that everything I'll share here is my perspective independently, and certainly isn't representative of Apple.
Absolutely. Perfectly said. Great. Yeah. So I can imagine like the same with me. You know, I work at the company ASML. It's a semiconductor company, and the same. My views are basically just my personal point of view of the things that I see. And we're doing the same thing. Our company, essentially, there are business critical roles that people are going to work every single day. And to be honest, like they are the ones who are pushing the business forward and, you know, taking care of customers and getting things rolling, you know, and we're just sitting at home, like, you know, working on our computer, writing little codes, analyzing data, little things like that. But honestly, it's great. It's because of them, people who are actually building the product out there, is that why the business is still running. So
Mhm.
awesome, great. Working from home, is it tough? How do you feel like in the meetings? I can imagine that like you started working at Apple before all this happened, and you were going to regular meetings like every other human being, right? How are things different after this pandemic?
Definitely. I think that the biggest challenge for me has been adjusting to a removal of at least a bit of the social component of work, where so much of the reason that work was fun, productive, innovative was because many of us spent so much time just sort of talking and throwing around ideas and non-formal meetings, non-one-on-ones, but rather just like in the hallway at lunch, just when we have a problem that we hit at our computer and turn to the guy next to us and ask them a question. So with that all gone, I think it's become a much more independent journey. But in some sense, that's also positive because as an engineer, as you've seen as well, most of your journey is independent, and being able to make yourself more independent, forcing yourself in that direction is often a benefit as well, just in terms of your own development.
Totally, totally. So just out of curiosity, is your working space like, you know, ABW? Is it like open space? Everybody's walking around, or do you have like cubicles? What does it look like at Apple?
It really varies company or office to office. So in our particular office, which is changing soon, so it'll be completely different whenever I'm back in the office. We had team offices per se. So we had these small clumps of 4 to 6 desks in separate rooms, and those would be separated by team. And then within that, it's open desks, usually facing away from each other, but organized in different ways. A lot of the companies shifting towards uh, either combinations of these pods with full open offices or proper full open offices. So it really depends on the team you're on, the office you're in.
Okay. Okay. Got it. The same going on with my company. Some teams are working at open spaces, and they, before the pandemic, obviously, they seem to enjoy it. Some people really hated it. Some people were kind of indifferent. I come from a hardware background, and I don't know. For me, like I like to have some like a piece of hardware on my desk to tinker with it, play with it and test it. But some like I can imagine that in an open space, it's going to be difficult. You just want to like keep carrying that thing with you. You're testing it. Yeah, so I can imagine that it's really role dependent.
That's exactly it. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
lucky in software to not have dependence on complex equipment. So it's easier to have a very simple space that's just the computer and
I'm so
yeah,
jealous.
the keyboard.
Honestly, like just carrying that laptop with you and just go sit wherever you want and open it up, start your code. That's
Exactly.
I'm jealous. Cool. All right. So tell me a little bit, why did you become a software developer? Was there an itch or a reason? The reason I'm asking you this, I have a friend who became a software developer literally because he watched Matrix One when he was a kid, right? And then
That's
he
awesome.
he wanted to become a software developer so bad since that day. Why did you want to become a software developer?
Definitely not anything as exciting as watching The Matrix. A lot of it for me was I first learned how to code in a physics class in high school,
Oh,
where we
cool.
learned a dialect of Python or a library in Python known as VPython for physics simulations. And it was a lot of fun. It was really exciting. It was super cool to write a small script, modify it, and see different things happen. In this case with simulations, but quickly expanding to really whatever falls under the category of software. So that got me into web development, which was what I spent most of my time throughout high school and college doing. And it was just a lot of fun. I enjoyed it enough that I was like, I could imagine doing this for a while. And so that drove me to study computer science at university and end up here.
Awesome. That's great. So what is the hardest thing about being a software developer?
For sure. Uh, there are a few different things. I think one of the biggest things that is specific to a lot of these roles is dealing with ambiguity. So we're given sort of vague things that we need to accomplish, and it's quite complex to distill that down to something that you can actually execute on. So this is something I struggle with every single day, where I have an idea of what I'm trying to accomplish, but defining that clearly in terms of something I can actually sit down and do is often quite complex.
Mm,
And so there are tons of different techniques around this that people learn. A lot of it is just from experience, understanding what actually goes into a given project based on the similar things you've done in the past. But I think that's one of the most difficult things day to day. And I'm sure that applies across disciplines. I imagine that it's a very similar problem that engineers that work on hardware face. It's a very similar problem that within our organizations, our project managers face and our managers themselves face. But that to me is one of the most difficult parts of my job day to day.
yeah, yeah. And I can imagine that like when you start a code fresh from ground up, that's probably the easiest thing, I guess, when you code, right? Versus like when you're inherit a big code that a bunch of people worked on for a long time. Is that the case? Like, do you feel that difference when you start fresh, or like versus starting from somewhere that a lot of people contributed in the past? Which one is more difficult?
Definitely, as you said, working on existing code bases. A lot of that comes from the fact that there is necessarily a higher bar that you're held to there as well in terms of quality when it comes to test coverage, when it comes to logging, when it comes to measurability and observability when debugging. Um, a lot of these things aren't necessarily your first thought when starting a project from scratch, unless you have enough experience to know that that's something you should focus on and enough time as well. And so when you're contributing to a large system that has already injected some of these principles, then that sort of extends the amount of time that it takes to understand what's going on, figure out how you can make the status quo better, and then make sure that whatever you're adding also lives up to this bar.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, that's very interesting. I personally, I always like to code, and since I was a kid, I started with the first computer that I had was a Commodore 64. I'm not that old, honestly, but that was like something that I inherited from my uncle, and I started tinkering with it, and yeah, it was so cool. Awesome. Okay, so. Let's see. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at Apple? You don't have to go into specifics, of course, but like, tell us a little bit what your day looks like at Apple.
Totally. So I work specifically on our ML data platform. So getting data to machine learning experiments and managing it. So my day to day is a combination of so first off, I guess I should say that it depends on the phase of a given project. But then even within projects, that's split up. So a small bit of my time is spent speaking to customers. All our customers are internal. Other teams that are doing machine learning, they use our tool. And so at least part of my time is spent just talking to them, understanding their challenges that they face, helping them resolve issues, and then bringing back feedback to incorporate into our roadmap. And then the rest of my time, as I mentioned, depends on the phase of a project. So at the beginning of a project, it's often spent explicitly designing the project. So using a design doc template to answer a bunch of questions about what goes into a project and sort of establish the. I mentioned earlier that like there needs to be a time when you distill ambiguity, and oftentimes you want it to happen in that design process where you think about the overall thing you're trying to accomplish. You figure out the minimal deliverables along the way to achieve that, and then you spec out how long those things are going to take you and each of the specific details as to how that's going to be done. So that when you're actually writing the code, minimal effort needs to go into figuring out what you're doing. Much more the effort needs to go into actually writing it, testing it effectively, understanding all the edge cases, and then debugging it when you inevitably face problems. So then that is the second phase, figuring all that stuff out. And then the third phase is sort of managing operations. So figuring out releases, doing stabilization work with the entire team, and then maintaining the existing system, whether that's taking a look at configurations, debugging production problems that come along because of changes in dependencies or just changes in something we're relying on, whether it's a server somewhere in a data center or an OS when people upgrade, that kind of stuff. So I would say days sort of look like one of those, like a combination of some of those things, with no like direct split of like every day is some portion of this, some portion of this, some portion of this.
Got it. Got it. Do you have like, crazy days that, when you're close to a release, like you have to pull, a lot of hours and, work, a lot with everybody around you to, to get it to the release date and stuff? Because you mentioned that you have internal customers, and I can imagine that you have strict release days that you have to, deliver the products and, things like that. Is that true, or is it more
Here and there.
flexible? Okay.
Yeah, so we're pretty lucky being an internal facing team where we have clear goals in terms of helping our clients achieve their public facing goals, which are much bigger than ours. And those have very strict deadlines. So as a result, our main accountability is to making sure that we help them achieve those deadlines, not so much that we maintain specific ones ourselves. We, of course, set them to hold ourselves accountable and to make sure that we continually have big goals we're working towards. But in the end, a lot of it is much more flexible in its ability to move around. And so certainly days can get tough, but that's less usually because of these deadlines and much more because of personal goals of like, I know I face days where I'm like, I've been working on this for a while. I know exactly what I need to do. I just need to sit down and get it through. And I'll sit and do that for 12 hours, something like that. Honestly, days don't get too terrible. We're pretty lucky to be in a relatively chill part of the company, though plenty of Apple does operate pretty intensely.
I can imagine. I can imagine. It's an incredible company, and yeah, with any competitive, incredible company like Apple, I can imagine that there's a lot of competition that's going
Exactly.
on. Obviously, sure. Can you tell us a little bit about your career path for a software developer at Apple? When you start, usually, how does that progress? And in average, of course, it depends from it varies from team to team, but like how do software developers climb up the corporate ladder at Apple?
For sure. Apple, in this regard, is quite vague. The hierarchy is relatively flat and is much more based on what you deliver rather than the timeline on which you deliver it. So the idea is that we have these axes of development, and you want to ensure that each year you're getting better at, as I said, delivering specific results, displaying teamwork and leadership on your team, and then bringing new ideas to the team, whether that's from external research or from external resources otherwise. And you sort of annually gauged as to how you're doing on each of these things. And when it's clear that you're performing at the next level of scope, then that's when you sort of see an increase in your responsibilities. And so there are a whole lot of different paths that this can go. It's really it's up to every individual person and their team, where there's a certain axis you can progress on there that leads you to become a technical leader in terms of an architect or someone like that that manages complex decisions about software, or it can lead you in the exact direction of people leadership where you become a manager. You might still be directly accountable for technical deliverables, but your day-to-day is much more as a people manager. Or it can lead you in the direction of being responsible for product decisions, which is sort of in the middle of those and driving consensus between different organizations. And you can sort of sit at any level at some intersection between these. Definitely not the like expert on how this all goes, but my understanding so far is that it's quite vague. They're Apple's not so much a company that emphasizes growth for the sake of growth. It's much more a company that emphasizes growth for the purpose of getting better at the thing that you do, so that you can deliver more for not just deliver more, but deliver more better things for the entire world as a part of this company.
That's amazing. And yeah, I can definitely see that. It makes a difference. Like if you ask someone to, if you, what you care most about is what they deliver, and the fact that they get better over time in what they deliver is a lot more effective than just like try to motivate them to get to that next level, the staff, principal, that kind of like the classic corporate ladder. And the other thing that I heard from you is like having a flat hierarchy is, I think it's very effective.
Right. And I wouldn't say it's completely flat. Like there definitely are those distinctions still, but and often they're correlated with years of experience, but they definitely aren't fixed at that. So at any level, consistently delivering what you're expected to and bringing new ideas and going above and beyond is much more what you're shooting for than what that means in terms of your level.
Awesome. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's get back to like how did you prepare for an interview for the interview to get to to get the job at Apple, and did you take specific steps, and how was your experience with the interview?
Totally. So I once again reiterated before answering this that I'm speaking entirely personally, so this isn't at all representative of the group. Um,
Absolutely.
so I joined Apple right out of college, and as a result, a lot of my preparation was really taking specific classes and working on particular projects um, through those classes, through research, and through internships. And so I guess the implicit preparation was that I got super lucky to find a team that focused on similar things to what I'd been doing at internships in the past couple of years. And that direction had sort of been out of luck. So as a sophomore, I'd interned at a startup working on machine learning infrastructure and happened to be something I enjoyed, something that provided a bit of value for the company, and was just a matter of when I got there, they had a few different directions I could go, and that was like what sounded cool, and ended up being a really positive stepping stone into the last couple of things I've done. Um, so a lot of it came from working on relevant things. In terms of closely related classes, for me particularly on an ML platform team, having taken a machine learning course was super important, and then having taken an algorithms course and having sought to deeply understand what I pursued, like the projects in those courses, and sort of follow-ups to the material in terms of more information that was introduced in the textbooks, papers, things that were being discussed in general. And then to a light degree, a lot of what prepared me was just sitting down and doing small projects to further develop my knowledge in each of these areas. So for me personally, a lot of that came from hackathons where I got the opportunity to work on all kinds of different things that were closely related, but can really be in any form. I think a lot of people in software prepare using tools like LeetCode and whatnot, which are excellent to get better at algorithms interviews. I didn't use these heavily, and a lot of that came down to my belief that a lot of the knowledge that you can use in those contexts is stuff that you can develop very specifically by rigorously understanding those algorithms as you do in an algorithms course. So going through the proofs of different algorithms, understanding how to generally apply them in complex problems, and spending all the time that you inevitably do doing homework in the class, really executing on that.
Got it. Okay, great advice. I know that software development roles, jobs, the interview process for them is notoriously dependent on a lot of algorithm questions, tough questions that you're supposed to solve on the spot, on a whiteboard in front of 5 people. Did you experience the same thing? Going to Apple, and how do you see a lot of value for candidates to spend a lot of time preparing for those grilling moments, prepare themselves for being able to respond clearly to questions that are asked in those situations?
I don't know that this is something I can speak too specifically to, but I would say overall what you described is relatively accurate. I mean, being able to talk about algorithms and talk about your previous work and talk about specific areas of knowledge related to the position you're interviewing for are these things are vital. Being able to do that clearly and knowledgeably in front of other people. So I'd say that like any position that applies much more broadly than just algorithms. I think a lot of it is understanding what the team you're interviewing for does and having experience doing that kind of stuff, whether that's experience personally or in work in the past. And as a result, being able to very deeply speak to that experience. Say, this is why I did those things that I did. These are the complex decisions that went into that. This is the mental framework I have around those decisions, whether the formulas you use or the theorems that you apply or whatever.
That makes sense. And do you recommend candidates having a GitHub account and having a lot of at least relative code to the role that they're applying for? Do you see a benefit there, having a GitHub account and having, a lot of code there?
I have no idea if our recruiters extensively look at these things, but I can tell you for sure that if you're a constant contributor to a piece of open source software that one of our groups uses, or that people know about, and that's relevant to the work that's being done here, that's something that likely will get on the radar of someone at the company. So definitely there are plenty of people that follow that path. And I would say that, if you have time and are excited about open source software, it's one of the best ways to continue developing skills in a specific area in a way that gets in front of relevant people.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, Akshay, we don't want to take too much of your time. Thank you so much for being here, spending the time. This is absolutely valuable advice. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. All right, hope to see you soon, and best of luck with your work and life. And hopefully soon we can all get out there and enjoy the sun a little bit more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a nice day. Bye.
You too. Bye.